Hi, and thank you for watching this new educational resource by the U.S. Institute Against Human Trafficking in partnership with Kids Not For Sale. This training that we have put together is being brought to you by an extensive interview with a former sex buyer. His name is Alan. In this training, we're helping dive further into sexual addiction. We have said for a long time and continue to share the message that the only way to end human trafficking, specifically sex trafficking, is to eliminate the demand. Eliminating the purchasing of women, men, and children for sex. But to do that, we must talk about the root issue. You see, if you were to voice the concern of purchasing sex, I'm pretty certain that everyone around you would agree. However, what if I told you that if you ever actively pursued the action of watching pornography, you have done the same act of purchasing someone for sex? What if I told you that you literally helped contribute to the sex industry by doing that? Most people would probably agree with that statement, but they'd still continue to watch porn, despite the guilt. One of the leading porn websites that exist had 21 billion hits to its website in 1 month. The truth is obviously being ignored. This training is focused on sexual addiction, the root of what causes most to pursue their sexual desires at someone else's expense. It's for the person who cannot control their compulsion to act on their sexual desires, which often lead to porn addiction and purchasing someone for sex. You see, sexual addiction is getting worse in our country, and this statistic is not just based on faith-based views. While we at the U.S. Institute Against Human Trafficking openly believe and state that there is a large moral issue at hand for watching pornography, fantasizing about sex with someone other than your spouse, involving attention to sexual images, and obviously purchasing sex, we are not going to discuss this form of moral perspective. We mainly hope to discuss this as a non-biased tone by showing the effects of sexual addiction. Throughout our discussion with Alan, a former sex buyer and an advocate for rehabilitating sex buyers, porn addicts, and sex addicts, we will pause and reflect on certain statements, stories, and opinions shared, as well as point out further information around the idea of sexual addiction. Our goal in this training is for you to understand the need of addressing sexual addiction and helping create an environment where sex addicts can ask for help. According to Mayo Health Clinic, 6 to 8% of the United States are sex addicts. That's about 24 million people. And according to Cleveland Clinic, the average age of sexual addictions begin at the age of 18, and most are not seeking help until the average age of 37. If we can help prevent sexual addiction at a higher rate and help people recognize that they may have a sexual addiction earlier in their life, we can help eliminate demand at a much higher rate. We can put traffickers out of business. We can eliminate the recruiting of women and men and children for sexual objectification and exploitation. We can all fight sex trafficking by recognizing many of these root issues. In this training, we're discussing the demand, which comes from the regularly diagnosed and often ignored life-consuming disease of sexual addiction. Alan, tell me what you do.
Well, I do a lot of things. I'm a husband and a father, so I have a lot of family responsibility. I hold down a full-time job with Raymond James Financial over in Clearwater. And I'm passionate about this organization, the Sexual Integrity Project, where we minister initially to men who need help with sex addiction recovery. More recently, we're branching out into helping ladies that are suffering through betrayal trauma. And it's our vision to have programs for sex-addicted women and for couples where this type of sin has crept into their marriage. It is incredibly destructive. It's resulting in a river of divorces. And here's the controversial statement. I don't believe that always has to be the case. Obviously, if there's abuse or abuse that's continuing, if you have an offending spouse who can't change their behavior, divorce may be appropriate. But what most people don't know is that this problem of sex addiction is solvable. It's not easy, but it is solvable. So what we want to do is minister to those offending spouses. And if they can heal and permanently stop their behavior, and we can help the ladies that they've hurt overcome their deep, terrible trauma, then maybe some of these couples will have a chance. And that's what I'm shooting for.
What we're talking about today, it comes down to like, what is a buyer? A buyer right now is the one demanding
Right.
that there are children, women, boys, men to buy to help their you're calling right now sexual addiction.
Yeah, I believe that's what drives most of the behavior. I'll just make this global statement. It's a horrible problem.
Yeah.
I don't have to tell you guys.
Right.
This is a huge and growing horrible problem.
Yeah.
But it's a problem that begins and ends with demand. And it is surprising to me that almost nobody is focusing on the men. From a spiritual perspective, we're all God's children. And through love and through marriage, men and women are just inextricably linked. And the health of one redounds to the health of the other. So it should not surprise anybody that we can help a lot of women that are in bondage by helping the men who are abusing them, to be quite frank.
What do you mean by help? Because I think that's probably the trigger word, right?
So if you study the men who buy sex, you will find that the data is very bipolar. So you have low-frequency buyers who buy less than once a month, perhaps once or twice a year.
That's a low frequency.
That's low frequency. That's somebody who is interested in the sexual aspect of it, the kicks and giggles, Then you have high-frequency buyers. And I believe most of that behavior is not an education problem. I think it's directly the result of sexual addiction / intimacy disorder. So these are broken men who are highly traumatized, who have lots of unresolved emotional trauma, and who have not developed the skills to do relationship with anybody, but especially with women. So they're not capable of doing the work in relationship to secure the sexual experience the way the rest of us do. They just don't know how to do that. At the same time, they are pushed hard to medicate their unresolved emotional pain with the drugs that are released with the sexual experience. So this starts in adolescence with a girl named Pam. PAM is an acronym. It stands for pornography-assisted masturbation. Here's another thing your average person on the street might not know. Anytime any of us do anything, our brain changes to accommodate that new behavior. It doesn't matter if you're trying to hit a baseball or play the guitar or if you're viewing pornography. Your brain changes. They say the cells that fire together wire together. And it's true. They can take neurological brain scans and show where before you're exposed to a new activity, your brain looks like slide A. And after you've performed that activity or practiced or engaged in it for a number of weeks or months, the new brain scan is different. So, your brain's plastic and it just changes to accommodate what you use it for. And this is particularly true with the consumption of pornography. Your brain changes into a pornography watching machine. And what we're learning is that the compulsion to continue is so strong it's not something a person can do on their own. They need community support and a group of other men who have had this problem and overcome it to coach and guide and sponsor them along the way. And that's what the recovery groups we have at the Sexual Integrity Project do.
Well,
when
are a
you're
lot of
ready.
those guys coming from like, I have a porn addiction, I need your help? Is some of your clients that
Okay.
just that, like they haven't purchased, they just have pornography?
Yeah, we started off 3 years ago as the Buyer Rehabilitation Project because
Yeah.
when I saw the power of this recovery group concept and that the behavior was solvable with it, I got really excited, and I came to the conclusion that the statutes and the John schools all over the country had missed the mark, right? Because they all assume it's an education problem. Nowhere do they mention addiction or recovery or anything. So, to borrow a baseball analogy, it's the biggest swing and a miss I ever saw. And I got excited about building a new type of John school. I call it John University. And we want to receive a flow of men from the court system, the guys who are getting busted on the street who try, the guys that you see in the newspaper that get popped in a sting. We want to minister to them with a deeper John School program that approaches it from a rehabilitative and a healing resource approach. The John schools that we have, if you look at the curricula, it just tells the guys all about human trafficking. It tells them about what that experience is like for a victim. And it coaches them about the different STDs that they can catch and what all the sanctions are if they get caught.
So kind of like guilt
Right.
tripping,
Yeah,
fear mongering.
but it's that education approach. And if you understand addiction, you'll quite quickly conclude that won't work. You can't punish the pain out of somebody. It's not possible. And that's how we treat a lot of our criminals and the men that do this. And I just think, I'm not saying we take those sanctions away. What I am saying is let's add some healing and some rehabilitation.
Okay.
I know that we can change the laws and increase the sanctions to the point that a guy is going to be really afraid to put his toe in the water. But if he's addicted, I promise you, that
not
toe
gonna make a difference.
is going back in that water. What I do is provide permanent, lifelong healing, so the desire to behave like that just completely goes away.
Right.
I teach these men how to live life differently.
Right.
And how to get their needs met in an appropriate way.
Let's pause here for a moment, as I'd like to discuss exactly what John School is. John School is often a court-ordered class or course that someone must take, usually after they have been arrested for purchasing sex from an adult prostitute. It's much like having to go to traffic school after getting a ticket. They provide an extensive overall training course addressing the myths around helping a prostitute when purchasing and sharing statistics about the sex trafficking industry. The U.S. Institute greatly supports John Schools. It is, in our opinion, a good first approach to addressing the illegal act of purchasing someone for sex. However, this should not be the only slap on the wrist, and it is not a class that truly helps someone overcome their sexual addiction. As Alan pointed out, most buyers perform their action from sexual addiction and actions that led up to this point, like pornography, and it is often related to trauma. We'll get further into what often causes sexual addiction a little bit later, but the point is that this class only scratches the surface. Our society should not depend on John School alone, and more should be done to address sexual addiction. This is something that Kids Not For Sale and the U.S. Institute often petition for in our country. We encourage you to do so in your local government as well. Let's continue our discussion with Alan. How did they get there in the first place?
Okay.
Right? So like before the person even buys, what is happening?
That's a great question. And I don't think it would be appropriate for me to speak to anyone else. And I don't have to speak in generalities. Rather, I will just give you an example from my own life. So I have bought sex 1,500 times. I'm not proud of that. It lasted a 17-year period of time. So in my case, I was born into a family of origin that had some problems. Specifically, my mother was suffering, at the time I was born, she was undiagnosed bipolar. They called it manic depression back then. So what that meant is there were a lot of developmental traumas that were visited upon me. There was a lot of nurturing and supervision that was withheld because my mother didn't have the energy to watch me. She just stayed in bed all the time. This caused me to get into situations where I got hurt. One particular example, when I was 6, because I was unsupervised, a friend and I found lots of pornography magazines, and we took them back to our fort where we could, spend untold hours looking at the pictures in there. And an early exposure to pornography is very damaging. When I sexually matured, I started masturbating with this pornography, and my brain started to change. So that's an addiction, but it's a different addiction than some of the others we might hear about. So it's different than alcohol or cocaine or gambling. Sex addiction is what's known as a process addiction. That's when a person is addicted to sex, love, or food. And what makes those three unique is it's something that we're supposed to do. It's a normal activity. In the right amounts, under the right circumstances, and for the right reasons, they're healthy. But once we start learning to abuse them, it gets very hard to quit. Quitting cocaine is relatively simple because any amount of cocaine is bad, so just stop taking it. It's very black and white. But when you're dealing with a process addiction, it's much more complicated. We all know about tolerances and detoxing. So as an addict who's, say, addicted to alcohol or cocaine, they're just searching for that same high that they got the first time they used. And the way that tolerances work in our body, they're never going to get it again. They can try, but they have to up the dose to try to get there. And that's why it can ultimately kill you, because you're consuming more and more and more of this foreign substance to the point your body just can't take it anymore. And you're chasing that high that you experienced the first time. So with sex addiction, it doesn't quite work that way. Sex addiction or sex addicts, they're not interested in more. They're interested in different. They want novelty. So you can begin to see how damaging this could be to a committed relationship if one party is a sex addict and wants to completely try things new. And that is also why pornography is the gateway drug into human sex trafficking. Because eventually that porn addict, their addiction is going to metastasize and spill out into the real world. Now that could be casual sex, with Tinder or what have you, but it can also be transactional sex. And I believe that's what's driving the market.
According to Addiction Help, the most common cause for sexual addiction is caused by a change in brain chemistry and brain pathways, unhealthy stress coping, and a history of trauma or sexual trauma. Individuals with a history of addiction in their family may be more at risk of developing sex addiction than others. It's safe to say that this is the same cause of many addictions, such as alcohol or drugs. However, as Alan stated, this addiction, sexual addiction, is known as process addiction. It's not like it's a bad habit or thing you just simply cut off from your life. The act of having sex or the desire to have sex is not what the issue is. It's the high compulsive behavior that makes it dangerous. Now, according to medical professionals, they often differentiate sex addiction from porn addiction. But pornography creates more desires to seek fantasies and introduces the idea of trying new things. You can see the danger of how that not only normalizes these fantasies for someone with a sex or porn addiction, but it is an easy gateway to take the next step by purchasing this experience. The reality is that the commercial sex industry consists of pornography, not just prostitution and sex trafficking. In fact, all pornography websites will advertise real human interaction. They literally solicit black market websites where you can find someone of a certain age, gender, race, fantasy, etc. We cannot, as a society, see pornography as a separate industry from sex trafficking. Anytime you watch pornography, you are feeding into the system that grows human trafficking. While you may not be actively purchasing anything, you are part of the traffic that sells this advertising to pimps and traffickers, who are obviously paying these pornography websites because they are seeing a return on their investments. What you'll hear in this next part with Alan is the truth that buyers can also be groomed. Traffickers must groom vulnerable women, men, and children into selling themselves for sex to feed the demand. But to grow their profits, these traffickers also invest in grooming vulnerable men, women, and children into purchasing sex as well. These pimps and traffickers want quotas to be met. So you have women, men, and children who hustle to sell themselves for sex, hiding the obvious trafficking under the umbrella that society likes to call prostitution or worse, sex work. If you are an addict of porn or think you might be an addict of sex or have one of the causes we mentioned, you are the vulnerable population that these traffickers are looking for and preying upon. How does a buyer begin buying? Right? Like you described in your journey, becoming addicted to pornography, and then eventually buying. What?
Most of the ones I can think of, including my own story, happened because there was already a market established. So, for example, one of the men who has made incredible progress towards lifelong healing, he was just driving alone at night in the rain, and he passed a woman who was walking on the side of the road and offered her a ride out of the goodness of his heart because it wasn't a good circumstance. He wanted to help her get where she needed to go and stay dry. Well, she was a victim. She probably had a trafficker pushing her to get business, and so she solicited my friend. And he had never done anything like that before, and he never would have on his own. But this is a man who served our nation. He's special forces. He's seen all kinds of horror. He's lost dear friends in the most gruesome of ways. So he's a high trauma individual, and he had a lot of unresolved trauma. I can't speak directly for him, but he just wasn't able to turn down that offer, and he had his first experience with a prostitute and became immediately hooked. My story is very similar. I was trying to help a woman who was in distress. She was in a fight on the street and basically begged me not verbally, but with hand signals through the window of my car if I could let her in and take her away. And then that resulted in my first experience, and I was immediately hooked. I can think of another gentleman who was watching porn. His porn usage went up and up and up. And then he started going to massage parlors, legitimate ones, for legitimate massages. And he picked the wrong massage parlor one day. And the woman that was massaging him offered him a happy ending. And he said yes. And I've had another man tell me when he experienced his first sexual release under those circumstances, it fueled behavior for him and took him places he never thought he'd go. And he spent money he never thought he'd spent. But it's almost like you find this medicine that helps the pain go away, pain you didn't even know you had. And it just becomes an instant addiction. So the solution that I bring to the table is, hey, let's stop being so scared to talk about this issue. Let's not be afraid to talk about pornography or sex. Let's have these recovery groups where men can sit down in a place that's safe, where they can be fully known and fully loved and share their behavior, as well as the pathway to stop. And that's really what it comes down to. Once somebody's in an addiction, they tend to isolate because they have to lie and hide about everything. It's easier to do that if you don't have to interact with anyone. But the price you pay is that you were wounded in community, and there's no way to heal in community because you've chosen to stay out of community. And being in a community like that is the answer. You know, a grace-filled community of hope and healing where there's no judgment. And when somebody can be honest about their behavior for the very first time and receive love in response to that, man, that's like Katie bar the door. That's when their healing can really start, because up until that moment in their life, all of the love they've received was uninformed because they were lying about their behavior or hiding or not disclosing, right? So the love they do get is discounted. They can't own that in their heart, and they just stay beat down and afraid. And it's just a very difficult existence. But if we bring it into the light, then they can grow and they can heal.
So based upon what you're saying about if you have a safe place for men to be able to share this, healing can start taking place. Do you feel like in many ways society, and I'm talking about secular and spiritual, like churches, Christian, other religions, or just straight up secular, society blocks that from any of that being a safe place?
Oh, yeah.
How so?
Churches can be the worst. I mean, it depends on the church, but many of us have experienced a church where if you talk about any brokenness or that you're stuck in any type of sin, you're kind of ostracized and treated as less than. Okay?
Well, what is the right context? What is the right context to share that you're stuck in a sin, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, from a church perspective, you know, all have sinned, all. And no one is righteous. No one. And if we keep those two things kind of in the forefront of our mind as we minister to the members of our church or the new folks that come in the door, I just think there needs to be a lot more of a welcoming and accepted type of atmosphere. And there are churches that excel at this, and there are churches that need to work on it.
Give me an example of when, let's just think of an average married man, okay, who needs to tell someone or talk about how he has just porn addiction. He hasn't bought, just he has a porn addiction. Okay. I know there's like a million answers, but from your experience of healing, what is a good approach and what is a bad approach for a pastor in that situation? Imagine a pastor's watching this right now. He's like, how am I supposed to help? Because I think most times, this is coming from PK, right? Yeah. Most times a pastor's going to want to help.
Oh, yeah.
But they don't want him to talk about it as if like I got this problem and they're not going to deal with it.
Yeah.
But we got to figure out how to deal with it, right? So what, and by the way, too, if my wife finds out, she's going to divorce me.
That's true.
Right? So then how does the pastor deal with that?
Yeah.
So let's have a little sympathy for the pastor. Right?
So now you're giving me a lot to unpack again.
Yeah.
let me start with...
Welcome to my podcast.
Let me start with I'm just watching porn, I'm not buying. That is not true. Most people would agree that it is, but I'm telling you it's not. Okay, a lot of these porn sites are monetized, you know, like OnlyFans, subscriptions. They're paying for sex. And
if you're paying to watch porn, you're paying for sex.
Yeah, absolutely, because the women that are performing on those videos almost exclusively are not doing it on their own. They're compelled by a boyfriend or a pimp, and they're not getting to keep the money that's being raised through those platforms. So that's a form of human trafficking. Even if you're on a free site, and I won't name them because I don't want to trigger anybody, but there are free sites, we all know, it's still sex buying because your engagement time, your mouse clicks are used by the pornographer to justify their advertising revenue. And that's what keeps the women in bondage. They're in bondage because you look. So I want everybody to just think about that. Watching pornography makes you a buyer. I've kind of hitched my wagon to Pure Desire Ministries out of Truesdale, Oregon. They've been working on this problem for about 35 years. And as far as I'm concerned, they are saving the world. The books that they have are grounded in the secular world. Okay, so they've gone to doctors who have written good books on sex addiction recovery, and they've gotten permission to rewrite those books, kind of 12-step it a little bit here and there and form it with Bible verse. And so their products perform at the intersection of science and religion. They like to say it's clinically based, but biblically informed. And it's a very effective intersection. They have programs for young men, high school age. They have programs for young adults. They have programs for men, all to overcome sex addiction. They have programs for women to overcome betrayal trauma. They have programs for women to overcome sex addiction, men to overcome betrayal trauma, and for couples. There is a church in Pennsylvania called Petra Church that has sort of realized this vision of pure desire, where they have all those kinds of communities that meet under their ministry umbrella at the church. And families that are dealing with any aspect of this can go for healing. What I'm trying to do through the Sexual Integrity Project is create half a dozen or more Petra churches in Tampa Bay, so that not only is that all available, but the families who need it in our area can pick and choose the night of the week, the area of town, and juggle classes for babysitting, for example, because these families are hanging by a thread. And I believe we need to make it as easy as possible for them to get the help they need. Those kinds of classes, I call it a recovery group. And there is a difference between a recovery group and an accountability group. So most people hear about a group, they think Alcoholics Anonymous, and Alcoholics Anonymous is great. They might think Celebrate Recovery, and Celebrate Recovery is great. But we go quite a bit deeper with the recovery group concept. So in addition to guys meeting and being able to share about their week, in a recovery group, there's accountability. So the whole no crosstalk rule that might be at one of these other accountability meetings, we don't have that. Other men that are further along in their healing will confront the others during or after their share, and a lot of growth happens. And that's a delicate thing, because you could push somebody away if you don't do it the right way. But we do it, and it's associated with better outcomes. The other thing we do is we bring them into community. We encourage at the beginning contacts where they're reaching out by phone or text. And then those contacts grow into, let's go to lunch, let's go to Topgolf. Why don't we hang out at the rodeo? Or my wife wants to go to the fair. Would your family like to come? And slowly, these men are able to practice healthy male relationships and build their own community. And you might not believe it, but they quite literally love one another into healing. Guys who are scared at their first meeting and don't know anybody end up with lifelong friends out of that group. So to answer your question, I would say a Pure Desire Ministry style recovery group. And if you go to the Pure Desire website, you can find them all over the country. They have several online. And my nonprofit has got half a dozen or so in the area that people can choose from. And like I said at the beginning, we're starting a betrayal recovery group for women starting tomorrow. And there are others. There's a therapy group in Wesley Chapel. So there are options now for people in the area if they're struggling with anything like this.
Alan shared a lot of suggestions and strategies around helping sexual addiction. But I want to make sure you also notice that he suggests to help with betrayal trauma as well. Honestly, it makes sense that most people who have a sex or porn addiction, which are mostly boys and men, struggle to seek help. It's exposure. It will easily hurt a loved one, such as their wife, girlfriend, or children. Having a safe place for someone to come forward is necessary, but we cannot shy away from the understood damage that will occur. Sex addiction will destroy families, so we must be ready to aid everyone involved. When you become a sex addict, it can destroy relationships and often leaves you isolated, which is what often brings one to porn or purchasing sex. It is not their partner's job to feed into their compulsions. It's up to the addict to address their desire of compulsions and learn to overcome it. The truth is that some relationships cannot be mended. The act may have gone too far. While that's a hard truth, sex addicts must deal with that. They must deal with the understanding and pain that they have caused. But keeping it a secret, keeping it stored up, this will also only end badly. This will cause other trauma. It must be dealt with. We're going to take a break for now. In the next video, we'll hear more of Alan's story as he shares what his healing process had to look like. It's not pretty, and it's not something he's super proud of by any means. However, we are thankful that he is willing to come forward and share this story, as it may help someone currently struggling with sexual addiction.